Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Assistive Technology Implementation, the Basics. My name is Kirk Behnke, and I will be your presenter for today. So I see that we have about 71 people here, and that's what a great crowd to have. So I'm glad that everybody is here today. I am broadcasting to you via AbleNet from Houston, Texas. So hopefully all of those folks who have had bad weather around the country, I sincerely apologize for that, or not that I had anything to do with it, but I'm sorry that you had such weather. But we are enjoying a beautiful spring day here, and you know, in Houston we don't get many great spring days. We're usually hot and humid, so I'm going to try to make this take advantage of the weather this weekend. Okay. So this is who I am. I'm Kirk Behnke. I'm a Senior Education Specialist for Region 4 Education Service Center. In Texas, we serve our whole region, which happens to have 50 school districts and 50 charter schools. We serve roughly about 1.1 million students just in our region itself. Then I'm also the lead for the Texas Assistive Technology Network for the state of Texas, where we provide technical assistance professional development for the state of Texas. My background is in assistive technology, with about 25 years of working in assistive technology in higher education, in all different types of environments, in K through 12 settings as well. I have an assistive technology professional credential, so that's basically me in a nutshell so far. So thank you again for joining us today. Let's get back into our presentation. Before we go into this, I do want to give credit where credit is due, and this module was based on the Assistive Technology Implementation module, which is working together to make a measurable difference. And this is part of our Texas Assistive Technology Network course modules, which we have online, which are basically PowerPoint self-guided modules to help you in your own professional development, and they are free for anyone to look at. This is sort of a Reader's Digest version of the module. I've cut it down to, I forget, maybe 47 slides or something like that, when it's really 100 and something slides. But I worked with Diana Carl as well as Joy Zabala on this specific module back in 2006 when I first started at Region 4 Education Service Center. But we have had revisions since. But I do want to let them know that there's many credits to Diana Carl and Joy Zabala. Also, I do want to acknowledge that I did pull some of the indicators from the QUIET indicators, which are quality indicators for assistive technology, and specifically the implementation piece as well as the program evaluation piece. So we will be talking a little bit about those particular indicators that are there to help us all as assistive technology professionals understand that there are quality indicators in the way we provide assistive technology services. So again, this is a professional development module in assistive technology based on that Texas School Series, and then a collaborative networking with Texas Assistive Technology Network. Okay, so we have the description as this workshop will address the basics of an assistive technology implementation plan. And again, that plan will probably look very different dependent upon your school district, dependent upon whether you're in a clinical setting, dependent upon whether you're in a higher educational setting. Again, those plans will definitely be dictated by your area that you're going to be working in. But I'm trying to make this as general as possible. However, when I say student use of assistive technology, I am truly meaning all folks who use assistive technology. We will talk about purpose and results. We'll look at that planning piece, bring in those quality indicators. We'll evaluate the effectiveness of AT and in the IEP. So our objectives today is going to be looking at that basic implementation plan, the purpose and results, the planning for implementation with those quality indicators, some of the expected outcomes that you should have, and as well as, and I couldn't do this session without pulling in some AT competencies that I feel have to be included when we talk about good quality AT implementation with fidelity. But before we move on, I would like to find out who exactly you are. So if you wouldn't mind going ahead and please telling us who you are, what your main profession is, that would really help me, hopefully, guide us in our presentation for today. So you can be an administrator, an AT person, an AT resource specialist, a case manager, a family member or a parent, a librarian, an OT-PT related service, speech-language pathology teacher, and or that infamous other. So let's see who's here. Great, wow. So we have a lot of AT people, but we also have a lot of OTs and PTs. Wow, I'm fairly impressed. I guess this is a good time of day for you or a good week. Maybe you're doing statewide assessments. I don't know, but usually we don't have as many OTs or PTs, so I'm glad that you're all here. Especially important is around the implementation part of this in assistive technology. But again, we got you all across the boards here, so I'm so glad that everybody is here for this webinar. All right. So before we move along, I do want to say that AT implementation is really one piece of the puzzle when we talk about applying assistive technology in different environments. The first thing, of course, is always to consider assistive technology. You really want to consider assistive technology in a variety of environments. And again, base that consideration process on the goal of either your student or the person whom you're working with. So make sure that you address the goal, the independent or educational or vocational goal of that individual first and primary, and then consider different types of assistive technology. I do other types of webinars in around assistive technology, and I always say this is the first piece that I always say is look at the goals of the person first. Don't let the technology dictate the goals of the person whom you're serving or working with. Please make sure that that we look at the consideration process. I see a question, what is an OT-PT, occupational therapist or physical therapist? Sorry, I didn't explain that. So when we look at consideration, again, please keep in mind the goal of that person. Then, of course, there's the evaluation piece. When we look at how do we evaluate assistive technology to meet that person's needs in that specific environment for that specific task. We'll talk a little bit about the SETT framework. I think I have a slide in there about that. But then, the crux of the information you're going to be talking about today is around implementation. So we need to look at how we can implement with fidelity, and one of the things that we can look at, again, is those quiet indicators. And then also, which goes hand in hand with that, is that evaluation of effectiveness. Are we being effective with our assistive technology implementation process? Or are we just looking at solving a particular incident, and then we don't follow up, we don't follow along, we don't look at all of the pieces that really make that technology either supported and or usable within those environments. And then, of course, the last thing is how can we improve our implementation process systemically and also per individual for looking at how we build in great ways of providing effectiveness and good implementation practices. So some of the ways to use assistive technology are many, and that where a student might use different types of tools, we know that we need to pay attention to all of them, as we plan for that effective integration of that technology. Also, the accompanying supports and services into that program for that individual. So let's look at supporting achievement of the goals, which I basically said ad nauseum already. Expand our educational or vocational plans or options. What can assistive technology do to increase participation in either educational, vocational, or independent living settings and activities? How can we increase that productivity? How can we increase independence? How can we improve quality of life? So again, looking at the ways that assistive technology can be used as a tool in order to provide access to those goals of the individual. Now again, on this slide, and I usually tend to talk a little bit about this, is that magic wand theory, where if we're trying to implement assistive technology, sometimes we may feel that the assistive technology is this magic wand piece of device that will automatically cure an individual of their disability, and level the playing field. Well, we're not there yet. It's not that idea of whether we're going to fix the individual with a disability, rather than look at what types of technologies and or tools could be used to scaffold their abilities in order to gain access to their personal, educational, vocational goal. So I think that's where we really need to think about looking at how we can use and ways to use assistive technology in order to afford persons with disabilities the opportunities to gain access to their goals. Give me 1 second. I just came back from New Mexico yesterday, and very dry there. I'm so used to more humid weather here in Houston, so my throat's a little dry. Sorry about that. So what are the purpose and expected results when we look at assistive technology implementation? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Where we look at, purpose is for students or persons to use assistive technology, to actively participate in also their curricular and their extracurricular activities. That's purpose is pretty straightforward. This is why we do what we do in assistive technology. And then what are our results? What are our anticipated or expected results? And in a K through 12 setting, we're really looking at increased academic achievement and also increased functional performance. So not only are we looking at hopefully gaining access to their educational goal, but how can we either increase or expedite their way to that goal? How can we provide more independence? How can we provide more productivity in order to gain access to their educational goals? This is a little flow chart that we came up here at Region 4 to help us sort of guide us through a flow chart options of, how do we incorporate assistive technology, and specifically how do we incorporate that into the IEP. So on the left-hand side, we have sort of like the who, what, where, that information. On the right-hand side, we sort of have the implementation, the why, how we're going to do that. But if you work from the top down, you look at your functional independent evaluation, your FIE, and then we ask these questions in the purple. Is AT needed to increase, maintain, or improve those functional capabilities of a kid with a disability? So again, that's coming specifically from the IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1990, and how we can access assistive technology and what is the best way to use and to increase and maintain or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. Then we look at the PLAF. And the PLAF is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So when we look at, again, the academic achievement as well as the functional performance, and is assistive technology specifically addressed in that area? How can that be addressed? And to ensure documentation of that so that we can follow through and follow along with the student as we go and implement the assistive technology to ensure that that it's associated with their academic achievement. What are some of the goals and benchmarks that are in there? Is AT listed as a condition? So is it part of the goal in order to reach this particular goal and or benchmark? Is that as part of the process? Is that part of the implementation plan? What about accommodations? Is it specified in the implementation plan that this will be an accommodation for this student in order to gain access to the curriculum, gain access to the activity in the classroom, gain access to a schedule, whatever the case might be? Then also, PLAF is present level of academic and functional performance. State assessment. Look at state assessment, and is the use of assistive technology needed as an accommodation, so you can provide that effective, and equitable access to the testing materials, or is it, as part of this, in Texas we call it an ARF process, an accommodations referral form, where we have to submit a referral form to the state agency and to gain access or gain permission to use a specific piece of technology so that this kid can take the test. Now in Texas we have had some reiterations of this whole process, and now we're looking at where we have a Tier 1 type of a Tier 1 level of accommodations that already can be built in without submitting requests for those on the state assessment. So, looking at different types of, calculators, looking at different types of screen readers for kids who are blind or have a reading or print disability. What are some of those things that can be implemented at a Tier 1 level without any type of, approval that it's already embedded into the process? And then services. Are there any services needed to support that assistive technology implementation? And when I say services, that goes back to our federal definition of what is an assistive technology device and service, where we look at, and if you wanted to know more about the definitions of those, there's plenty of other recorded webinars that I've done in the past through AbleNet to help you with identifying those services and what that really means. But that could mean maintenance, training, evaluations, any type of supports that are needed. The visual I usually give for an assistive technology service is, think of an iceberg, where the iceberg that's above the water level is really the device, and the ice that's below the surface is really the supports. And of course the supports are going to be way bigger than the device itself in order to keep the device afloat and to really be used as a useful tool for the individual. And then deliberations. What's the use of an AT clearly communicated and documented? And, is everything documented? And you'll find this is going to be a recurring theme as we move through these slides to say about documentation for a good implementation plan. So what are some of the big ideas that we need to keep in mind about assistive technology implementation? And I just have a few slides here that I want to just go over. One, it involves the use of AT devices, AT services, and other strategies that promote student achievement. So when we look at that, we really want to look at it's not just a device, but it's also the service. The device is not a magic wand where we can fix a child with a disability or a person with a disability and just, move away. We really want to follow the whole entire implementation process, including supports for training, maintenance, etc. AT implementation also focuses on functional areas of concern and when and where they occur. So we're not looking at just, in the classroom for a use of assistive technology in order to gain access to a textbook. We're really looking at, okay, that might be a good tool for that individual for that specific task in that environment, but we also have to look at other areas of concerns where that individual needs that for their functional performance. And some of the functional areas we need to look at are, reading, writing, any type of literacy piece, looking at math, problem solving. Communication happens everywhere. It just doesn't happen, in your speech and language, hour that you have per week. Recreation, of course, you're looking at different types of assistive technology, recreational tools as part of, physical education or as part of just socialization. Your daily organization, getting, some assistive technology and or tools to help support executive functioning of students with disabilities. Seating, positioning, ensuring that seating and positioning is crucial in order for a person to actively participate, in all areas, whether it be accessing a computer or accessing a communication device or accessing a whiteboard or, accessing different types of things in the lunchroom. Whatever the case might be, those are functional areas. I'm a big proponent of seating and positioning. I'm glad that we have so many OTs, occupational therapists, and PTs, physical therapists, on here, because you understand the importance of seating and positioning. Then, of course, we also have sensory, hearing, and seeing. What are some of the self-care areas? Mobility, behavior. Looking at behavior issues, engagement pieces. That we talk about in UDL, universal design for learning, ensuring that that behavior is maintained. And then also specific task-related skills dependent upon that specific task that we need to do. Some of the other two more slides on big picture items is looking AT implementation is an ongoing process. It's not a one-shot, clinical setting, evaluative thing, and then you leave. It really is an ongoing process that includes the IEP committee, the Individualized Education Plan IEP committee, and those who work with that student in all of the areas. So looking from when the kid gets on the bus until the kid gets home in the evening. Also, the last one is it really requires a plan, a collaborative plan developed by all of those people who are involved with that student in all areas and all environments. So that's just good best practices of looking at AT implementation. Now, I'm just not whistling Dixie here. This is not just based on Kirk Behnke. This is actually based on different types of quality indicators for assistive technology, where it's a group of individuals, national individuals around the area of assistive technology applications and implementation. And then we can look at some of these indicators that they have seen on a national basis, and that the panel has come together, worked on these indicators, giving you ideas and the intentions of these indicators and why these are so important. So there's two slides on assistive technology implementation from Quiet, and each one of these bullet points is one area. So if we look at the one indicator, so one area of AT implementation follows a collaboratively developed plan. Yep, I already talked about that. So you know that it's collaborative and it's a plan. It's based on evaluation data, and it presents levels of performance. Yep, so we look at those present levels of performance and what types of data we have on the student and or individual, and how can we apply that information into the plan. Also looking at shares responsibility, ensuring that we share that responsibility, especially for kids who are starting to transition from a K through 12 setting to either another district or to higher education or vocational or independent living. We really want to ensure that the receiving entity, organization, college, university, independent living center, has that information and is part of that team as they transition out of their school environment into the receiving environment. We want to make sure that we share that responsibility. We know what types of tools are being used. We know how they're being used and how they're being implemented to ensure that these practices and that bottom of the iceberg is supported for that tool for that person to use. Okay, and then also occurs across all environments and activities. So we look at how that assistive technology could be used specifically for a task in a specific classroom. However, there are specific areas like communication, like independent living skills, like executive functioning skills, that the assistive technology, if it supports those skills, how is it that it is used across all environments and those activities? And that would be helpful on a plan that's there. And if that plan in the K through 12 setting is usually the IEP, Individualized Education Plan, or it could be a Section 504 plan, it could be an ADA plan, it could be whatever you want to call it in your district to help provide those supports. Okay, next slide is looking at AT implementation. You want to encourage multiple means of participation. So have a variety of ways of how people can be involved and or supports, whether it be natural supports such as family members, neighbors, colleagues, friends, etc., peers, or could it be, paid supports of your related professionals, etc. Also includes training for the students, staff, families, and others. We know this has been a struggle for many years of providing that good device-specific training, usually for those who are immediately involved with the student, dependent upon their age and their independent level. However, we do want to ensure that we have natural supports that are trained to help support the student in their use of and implementation of assistive technology. We also want to include management and maintenance of the materials that could be around that piece of technology, whether it be looking at a mounting system for a communication device, or whether it be curriculum around looking at digital materials in order to be accessed through assistive technology for that student. And then also changes will happen in implementation based on formative evaluation data. So continue to capture that data. That's a whole nother session, but continue to capture data use of how that student is using that device. Is that student using that device successfully? What types of data can either support that or negate that device? And perhaps keeping a look at in implementation of device, maybe that student outgrows that device. Maybe that student just needed that for a temporary fix until they either got a concept or they got that information or they finally got a hold of that concept for implementation to reach that educational goal. Then you have to go back and see what other types of technologies and or assistive technology specifically in this case can be used to support that student in their next educational goal. So again, those changes will be based on the formative evaluation data. Okay, so how do we develop an effective AT implementation plan? Where do we start? Well, you need to start with your SETT framework. And this is looking at your SETT framework from Joy Zabala, which in the SETT means Student, Environments, Tasks, and Tools. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the SETT framework, I encourage you to go to joyzabala.com and look at some of the information that she might have. I can probably share. Let me do this right now. Share some websites with you. I don't have Joy's up here. Give me 1 second. So if you go to joyzabala.com, she's done the SETT framework, looking at different types of SETT documents that are all here. So she has a plethora of resources for you to look at if you're not familiar with the SETT framework. Also up here, since we're now here, it's quiet.org, or that's the vanity URL, quiat.org, which goes to their quality indicators and assistive technology. Again, they have plenty of resources that are on here for you to download and to help you support your implementation piece. I also have up here texasat.net if you're interested, and go to our AT resources page. Our training modules page, and if you wanted to have the full implementation module, you just click on the implementation module here, and you can gain access to the materials as well. Also, I do want to just mention one thing. We do have Assistive Technology 101, so we have some information on you from AbleNet University if you tend to look at looking at more information on assistive technology. Okay, now I need to go back. Okay, so again, student, environment, tasks, and tools are the 4 components of looking at how we can properly implement assistive technology for all students. Here is the implementation sequence when we look at the SETT framework, where the student is in a typical environment and uses those tools to accomplish the task. What happens is that, on the bottom of that you have your learner attributes, your physical, learning, cognitive pieces, their data information. You also have their spectrum of abilities, looking at language and communication, social networks, and social emotional, and your experience. That all forms the foundation of that individual. So that's the S of the SETT process. Then you look at the environment that the student might be in. Is it, what are some of the expectations? What are some of the attitudes around that environment? Is it physical, technical? What types of equipment are needed? What types of personal supports? What are some of the conditions around that environment that need to be considered when we're looking at implementation? Now, the one thing we're going to talk now, because of the tools part, because at the implementation piece, we've already went through the evaluation piece, where you look at the student, the environment, the task, and then the tools. But in the implementation aspect, when we revisit the SETT framework, then you want to look at the tool before you look at the task. Because what you're doing is you're looking at the tool in order to help with identifying what that tool can be used in that environment for that specific task. So it's kind of a little flip-flop here on revisiting of the SETT framework. But that's when you want to look at the tools and what will help that person to achieve, what are some of the strategies, what are some of the services, and what are some of the devices that enable that student to have successful implementation and then apply it to those tasks, those specific tasks for, spelling homework or understanding the water cycle, or, looking at reading Moby Dick. Again, what are some of the tools that can be used in order to help with those specific tasks? And then, of course, it's all about curriculum standards, achieving those curriculum standards, and then also being tested, unfortunately, for on those areas that the student will need to be accessing. So, what is known about the student? The functional area of concerns. What does the student need to be able to do? What is that student that's really difficult or impossible, for that student to do independently? What are some of the special needs or related concerns? What are some of the accommodations that need to be made? What are some of the social emotional issues around the student? Sometimes it's kids with autism who might have sensory, I just lost my train of thought, but might have sensory pieces that they're tactilely defensive in accessing specific technologies. Some of those things that you really have to understand about the student in order for good implementation to happen that may have been missed when we look at the evaluation process. What are the present levels of achievement, and then what are your outcomes? What are you trying to do? What is your goal? Is it to increase reading speed or comprehension or fluency? What are some of those goals that you need to have in mind about the student? And then what is known about those supports and barriers that happen to be in that environment? So if we move up that pyramid, now we looked at the student, now we're looking at the environment. What is the arrangement? What is the instructional pieces? What are the physical pieces? Maybe that's because the kid uses a wheelchair, and unfortunately his reading language arts is on the second floor and there happens not to be a working elevator in that building. It's not that we have to, have a technology to rocket him up to the second floor, but we just might have to move a classroom, to put it down on the ground floor for him, or fix the elevator, or, look at other options for the student in the physical sense. And then what's the supports that are needed for both the student as well as the staff? What are some of the supports that are needed for training, for, how does this, piece of technology work around saliva, or in an caustic environment, out in the weather, whatever the case might be. What are some of the access issues, whether it be technological or physical or instructional? What are some of those access pieces so that we can have access to that technology, throughout the person's environment? What are some of the materials and equipment that are used by others in the environment that could possibly help for and support that student in that particular environment? And again, attitudes and expectations are probably one of those things that you really need to look at. Maybe it says the kid is being included in a regular classroom, and the regular ed teacher really has a hard time understanding why this kid might be in this, fourth grade reading language arts, class. What are some of those attitudes and expectations of the teachers or co-teachers or paraprofessionals that may be in that classroom, and how could they be either a support or a barrier within that environment? some of those things you want to look at, especially when you're talking about implementation. Because everything might be really great in an evaluation process, and you found the right tool, and the kid really likes it, and everything like that. But it doesn't take much to sabotage a good implementation part, especially around attitudes and expectations of folks that are trying to support that student in the environment. Okay, so what are the tasks? Again, looking at tasks has been difficult or impossible. What are some of those specific things that the student needs to be able to do? If it's impossible for that kid to get up onto the second floor because there's no access method because he uses a wheelchair, that's basically impossible. What are you going to do to help that? What are some of the environmental pieces that you could do? Again, move that class down to the ground level, or move it out to a portable, or whatever the case might be, as long as it's accessible. And then what are the functional things that are part of being actively involved in those learning environments, such as communication, good instruction. Again, how can this kid participate in the social, activities or class assignments that might be a collaborative activity for all the students in that classroom. And then what tools? What tools have been identified as needed by that student and also others? That everything that the student needs and others that the student to accomplish the task in that environment, where they need to be done, what needs to be applied, ensuring that those tools are readily available for that student and for the others who support that student, ensuring that those tools are there. And have they been identified, and is that part of the plan, the implementation plan, to ensure that there's a battery charger for a note-taking device, just in case the battery suddenly dies or it wasn't charged in the night before. Are those implementation process plans in the deliberations part, is that all put into play for the plan? Looking at the tools for the students. What tools have been identified as needed by that student, and do the task in the environment in order to meet those expectations. So this is the tools for the student needed by the student. We're talking about the student here. When we look at accommodations, the modifications, what is the technology? What is the AT, the infrastructure, the IT? What are some of the universal design for learning aspects that are already in place in those tools? What are some of those tools that could be used as an assistive technology device for that student that might be just used as an instructional technology device for all others? And to ensure that that piece of technology is there for that student if that goes away for the other students. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear here. But let's say, for example, inspiration software is a mapping type of graphical mapping type of software that's used on numerous in educational environments to help kids get organized their thoughts to either write a story or to brainstorm ideas, or basically a pre-writing activity. What if that tool suddenly went away? The district didn't, or the school itself didn't renew the license, and that one kid who needs that inspiration software because of his learning disability, and it's not been written in the IEP, that he has access to that, and that license goes away, you're going to have to provide some other option for that student. Now, if it was written in the IEP that inspiration will be provided in his reading class, whatever, then you're safe, but you still have to provide that inspiration software. So again, looking at universal design for learning is wonderful, and gives tools a lot for all other kids. However, if all of a sudden you take that away due to budget cuts or a different operating system, or I don't know, number of reasons, IT decides that it's not safe, you still have to provide that because it is assistive technology for that student if it's written in the IEP. So again, sports, services, training, document. Document. Now, tools for the others. What tools are needed by others for the student to do the tasks in that environment in order to meet those expectations? So looking at training, support, Again, that big iceberg effect, looking at the bottom of, under the water level iceberg of looking at decision making, strategies, instructional strategies, how to use that technology in the curriculum to access textbook materials, to access activities, to access collaborative activities within the classroom, homework, looking at field trips, whatever the case might be. What are some of the training and supports that are needed for those folks that are helping support this tool for this child, and what are some of those pieces that need to be in place? Technology integration, operation, the management of that. So many times, special education may not speak with information technology or your ed tech folks, and or the powers that be that hold the access to the internet for your school. And sometimes the assistive technology is IT based or web based, and there's no interaction or communication between the two, and all of a sudden you need it for this kid, but it's not available in all environments that the student needs it. So again, implementation plan, putting that into play will really help alleviate problems later on down the line. Excuse me. Okay. So implementation, is change. It's change for everybody. It's not just change for the student. It's change for teachers. It's change for paraprofessionals. It's change for parents. It's change for administrators. So what we really need to do is look at, okay, if we have a change formula, and this change formula is by Garmston and Wellman. This has been around for a long time, but it's A plus B plus C is greater than X will equal change. Now, A is where you have shared dissatisfaction with that current state. So looking at maybe the consideration piece that, we really should consider some type of tool for this kid in order to access the general curriculum. And then B is the shared vision. Is the team sharing this vision of that desired state by a critical mass? If so, let's put it in the IEP. Okay, yes, we consider assistive technology. We need to now implement this into the IEP plan, ensure that the implementation process is there, and then how can we have practical steps from getting, from that consideration to that implementation part, and how we can get that into an implementation plan within the IEP. And those three steps really need to outweigh the cost of those changes. What's it going to cost? And I just don't mean financial cost of whether purchasing the device, but also all those other costs that surround devices, whether it be maintenance or whether it be support, warranties, IT folks supporting that through an infrastructure of web access, internet access, all of those types of things. Then that will equal change. So we really need to look at how we can get this implementation process from point A, seriously, to point C, which is the change. So now we need to look and have a shared vision of that expected outcome. How does the student use assistive technology, or the student uses AT and other strategies to be an active participant in those educational activities that also increase their academic achievement and functional performance? We have so many individuals say, well, they don't, this kid's doing okay in class, he's getting a C, he struggles because of, his disability, but, he's passing, he's doing okay. But really, when you think about, expected outcomes of assistive technology, that assistive technology tool should help to get that kid from a C to a B or an A, to increase their academic achievement as well as their functional performance. So a lot of times, sometimes districts will say, well, the kid's doing okay, we really don't need to do anything else. Well, I tend to disagree, because I think what we can do is really consider how that student is being, why that student is struggling so much, and how that student could possibly use assistive technology in order to gain access and increase their functional performance and achievement. A story I use a lot is, a kid who might be using a manual chair, comes to school, etc., but now he's on a high school campus, and at least here in Texas, high schools are huge. We have, college campuses worth of high schools around here. So to get from point A to point B can be quite fatiguing for, somebody who might be using a manual wheelchair. To get from the field house all the way up to, maybe, English in, an older part of the campus or in a building. And let's just say this kid has muscular dystrophy or some type of musculoskeletal disability where pushing himself is going to take a lot of effort. He can get there, yes. He might be late to class, yes. And he might also be exhausted by the time he gets to class. So what about, incorporating a powered mobility device or scooter or something of that nature to enable him to get to class on time, as well as being able to be less fatigued and being able to, pay attention in class. That could be, part of an IEP in order to gain access for that kid on that expected outcome. Just to really look at, it's not all about just, computer stuff. It could be around physical mobility. So let's think of some other questions here that we're going to be looking at as well as we move through this process. So what areas of the student's achievement and functional performance are expected to change when the student uses assistive technology? Well, there's a whole bunch of areas that could change. Again, one could be that just participation thing that I just talked about, where the kid could actually be an active participant in their English language class because he's not so fatigued coming from the field house. What about communication? Is it sure that, can we ensure that the kid has proper communication, not only verbal communication in the classroom, but what about digital communication, of accessing Edmodo or different types of educational software for homework? What about productivity? Looking at how we can increase this individual's performance and productivity in order to gain access to a better way of implementation of that tool and and access to the general curriculum. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. And then also progress in different types of curricular expectations. Looking at how can we improve that progress. Another question we could ask is, what are the aspects of the student's achievement and performance, and are they expected to change? Are we ensuring that quality and quantity of that student's achievement and performance, are they increasing? If not, are they decreasing? Is this kid slower with the technology? That could be true. We kind of have to look at the implementation plan to do that follow along and follow through to ensure that what we thought would be really good for the student is, a good choice for the student. A lot of times when we go through assistive technology evaluations and we evaluate to the student, where we say, okay, you need this device A, and this kid's just like, well, okay, very complacent at the time, but then kid doesn't use it later on, because it wasn't the right color or it's not as cool. And a great example of that is maybe getting this kid a laptop computer with the designated assistive technology for portability, but everybody else is using tablets. And all of a sudden this kid wants a tablet instead. Well, is there a nice meeting in the middle of the road piece where we could maybe look at a Surface tablet or something that has full-fledged programs for access that the kid could use and be happy with that type of device. So looking at what aspects of that student's achievement and performance are expected to change. So looking at the vision. And then what are the specifics of how that student will use the assistive technology? For which task, under what conditions, when and where is that student going to be using it, how and with whom. It's not just apply the the technology for the student and you're on your way. No, we need to have some conditions that student will be using it. For example, a high-tech augmentative communication device for the student may or not be appropriate in a physical education setting. and specifically not appropriate for swim class for this kid. So what other types of what other types of Plan B options are in place when the technology breaks? I noticed they said when. I didn't say if. I said when. So always have a backup plan when it comes to implementation as well. And what needs to be changed so that the student can do or learn to do the tasks. Looking at how we can have good areas of accomplishment. How do we use, what are some of the best practices of use of assistive technology within an educational setting? What are some of the strategies that can be used? What are some of the accommodations, modifications that are out there? And again, that self-empowerment, looking at how, we can, and I'll talk a little bit at the next slide, is how can we increase self-empowerment? How can kids really understand good use of their assistive technology? And then what supports and cues will the student require in order to be successful? Sometimes it's a matter of just sensory information, auditory, visual, tactile, physical, most to least the most, different types of cues and supports that can, be embedded within the environment for that student to be successful in order to either A, utilize that device properly, or B, prompts for utilization of technology. Could be just a visual schedule that might be in the classroom or on wallet size for the kid to just gain access to, or even through a cell phone and looking at different types of programs that could remind kids or students where they need to be at specific times of the day, and helping trigger some executive functionings for those kids. Excuse me. One of the things that we talk about within this module is looking at how students could develop their own AT competencies. And this was adapted from Janice Light from the University of Pittsburgh in her journal, the journal article of AAC in 1989. Yes, that is 1989. But it's been very usable. Her work has been greatly influenced in the area of communication competence, but we're using this to also look at assistive technology competence. And her 4 areas that she talks about are looking at functional competence, operational, strategic, and social competence. So these are the 4 areas that would help with applying and giving kids self-empowerment around their technology so that they can be the owners of their technology, know when to use it, know how to use it, how to operate it, how to functionally use that, how do they strategically maybe use that device in specific areas, and maybe use a backup system in other areas. And then what is the social competence of this kid? Is this kid using their technology socially appropriate? Is it a matter of looking at how all these competencies areas can really be successful in the implementation process for assistive technology implementation? If you want to know more about these competencies, again, check out the texasat.net site and look at the implementation module itself, the whole 120 slides or whatever it is. Or also go and look and research, Google Janice Light's communication, towards the definition of communicative competence for individuals using AAC. So what are the resources that are needed by the people who will support the AT use? We keep talking about the student using the device, but what about the people who are supporting that device for the student as well? So we need to build those into the implementation plan, making sure that the parents have support, staff, training, time, management, warranties, all those other things that are in place for the technology to be used appropriately. Now, here's the whole evaluation of effectiveness. So looking at programmatic piece as well as individual effectiveness of how we can provide evaluation. So looking at the quality network, quality indicators in assistive technology, and here are the indicators around evaluation of effectiveness. One includes clearly defined responsibilities. So clearly define your responsibilities in the implementation plan for all individuals around the IEP. Is it related to one or more educational goals? Is it related, is this technology need to be used in the science classroom, and does it need to be used in physical education? Is it, technology that can be used at home? Can we incorporate this as for homework? Or what are the other options that this kid needs for homework if that device is not going home with them? What are some of the quantitative and qualitative measurements of changes? How can we collect that data in order to successfully implement that tool or understand why that tool is not working? And then taking place across all those environments and activities. We already talked about that in that implementation plan. And then the last three indicators for evaluation effectiveness is that it requires analyzing student achievement to identify supports and also those barriers. So what are some of the supports, natural supports, initiated supports within the environment, and also what are some of those barriers? Maybe it might be going back to that general educator who may or may not see the value of that kid with a disability in his or her classroom. That could be a attitudinal barrier. Maybe we need to provide different types of data and or structure and or leadership for this teacher to understand that it's important for this kid to be in your science class. And what are some of the expectations or changes that are needed that are based on that data, because we always need to keep going back to our data, and then knowing that the evaluation of having good effectiveness in the implementation process is that it's an ongoing process. This is not a stop and then start all over again. It is an ongoing process. So, in summary, effective implementation requires a plan. Implementation is effective when that data is captured, and not captured but also documented, and that data shows that student achievement and performance must meet the criteria, how the decisions about changes are based upon, and the data review, and then analyze that data to make sure that we can either go back to the drawing board and saying that this technology is working, or what other supports are needed for this kid to be successful with this technology. And then implementation builds in competency, where we want to ensure that as part of the implementation plan, we build that self-empowerment of the student and build competency levels in those 4 areas that Janice Lights talks about, looking at functional competence, operational competence, strategic competence, and social competence. So I have 2 minutes for questions. So if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, please. Who is financially responsible for an AT device such as a power wheelchair in Texas? And do devices that are purchased for student uses transition? Wait, let me. Financially responsible for the AT device such as a powered wheelchair. Well, if it's written in the IEP, then the school is responsible. If it's written in the IEP as part of a contract, as part of a plan, an implementation plan for a student who's using a wheelchair or needs a power wheelchair, and the school requires that in order for them to gain access to their educational goal, then the district is responsible. If it's not written in the IEP, and it's a personal device, then it could be medical insurance or whatever the student is coming with at that time. But as part of the IEP, as part of the individual education plan, if that power wheelchair is needed by that team, they decide collaboratively by the team that a power wheelchair would really be beneficial for this kid, and they say that this kid needs it, then the school district needs to provide that. And do devices that are purchased for student usage transition with them as they graduate and become their personal property if the school has purchased them? Great question. Patty, that big depends. If the school provides that technology, whether it be mobility or independent communication system, whatever the case might be, If the school is willing to let the kid have it, great, then it's gone. But more than likely, the district is going to say, well, you know what, that's our technology, and we need it back after you graduate. So what you need to do is in the transition plan is look at, where is the student going next? Is it going to higher education where he's going to need that device? And then work out an agreement plan. On the Texas AT site, we have something called, we have a link that is a transfer, it's called a transfer type of form that is used to help with transferring those technologies into the receiving piece. Oh gosh, what's it called? It's in the supporting transitions of assistive technology users module, and it is. Sorry, I don't have it right here off the top of my head, but it's a form, and let me put my email address in here so that you can contact me, and I'll make sure that I get you that information. And here is my email address. Let's see, what else? What AT can be used as testing accommodations in Texas? We're going to find that information. So all you have to do is go on the TEA website. I know it sounds easy, and I know it's harder than it looks. But go on to the TEA website and then look at student accommodations. Just type in and search student accommodations, and there's a tier system of looking at student accommodations for the STAR. Okay, so thank you very much for today's webinar. Thank you for your attendance, and I really appreciate you being here today.